Midnight on Highway 49 in Mississippi was never a good time to be traveling alone, especially if your skin was the wrong color. The checkpoint at the edge of Clarksville sat like a trap, a single flickering streetlight illuminating a small booth and a patrol car parked at an angle that blocked half the road. Grace Adeyemi walked slowly down the shoulder of the highway, her modest blue dress catching the humid night breeze. She was 32 years old, a beautiful woman with natural hair pulled back from her face, high cheekbones, and eyes that carried both intelligence and weariness. In her hand, she clutched a worn leather bag. Her knee-length dress and simple flats gave her the appearance of any working-class woman making her way home after a long day. What no one could have known was that Grace Adeyemi was a federal circuit court judge, one of the youngest appointees in the country. Tonight, she was traveling to see her dying grandmother in a small town 40 miles away. Her car had broken down 2 miles back, and with no cell service and no passing vehicles, she'd made the decision to walk. As she approached the checkpoint, a figure emerged from the shadows. Officer Dale Hutchins stepped into the light, his hand resting on his belt, his beer gut straining against a uniform that had seen better days. He was 45 years old, with thinning hair, cold blue eyes, and a face that had long ago stopped pretending to care about the people he was meant to serve. Behind him, a younger officer, Tommy Weiss, nervous energy and eager eyes, leaned against the patrol car, watching. Dale's voice cut through the night air, sharp and mocking. "Where do you think you're going at this hour?" Grace stopped a respectful distance from the checkpoint. Her voice was calm, steady. "Good evening, officer. My car broke down a couple miles back. I'm walking to my grandmother's house in Meadowbrook." Dale looked her up and down slowly, deliberately, his expression making it clear what he thought of her. He stepped closer. "Let me see some ID." Grace reached into her bag and pulled out her driver's license. Not her judicial credentials. Those were tucked safely in a hidden pocket. Just her personal license with her name and address. She handed it to Dale, who snatched it from her hand and held it up to the light. "Grace Adeyemi," he read aloud, pronouncing her last name with exaggerated difficulty. "That African?" Tommy snickered from behind him. Grace's jaw tightened, but her voice remained level. "Nigerian heritage, yes." Dale studied the license for a long moment, then, without warning, tossed it onto the ground at her feet. It landed in a puddle of oily water. "Pick it up." Grace looked at the license, then back at Dale's face. She could see it now, the cruelty, the casual exercise of power, the test to see if she would submit or resist. This was a man who enjoyed making people smaller than themselves. Slowly, maintaining eye contact, Grace bent down and retrieved her license. She wiped it on her dress and stood back up, her posture straight, her dignity intact. "Is there a problem, officer?" Dale stepped even closer, invading her space. His breath smelled of coffee and cigarettes. "Yeah, there's a problem. I don't like your attitude, and I don't like people who don't show respect." Behind him, Tommy pulled out his radio. Grace heard him say, his voice carrying on the still night air, "Yeah, we got another one. Bring the van." Grace's heart rate quickened, but her expression didn't change. Another one. That meant this wasn't isolated. This was routine. Grace Adeyemi had presided over dozens of cases involving police misconduct. She knew the statistics, the patterns, the legal frameworks, but standing here, vulnerable and alone, she understood for the first time what it felt like to be on the other side. To have no power, no voice, no protection except the Constitution itself. And she was about to find out how much that really meant at midnight on a Mississippi highway. The checkpoint at Clarksville had a reputation. Locals called it Dale's Toll because everyone paid, one way or another. For years, complaints had been filed about harassment, illegal searches, and planted evidence. But Officer Hutchins had friends in high places. His brother-in-law was the county sheriff. Nothing ever stuck. Dale circled around Grace like a predator sizing up prey. "I need to search your bag. Empty it out, right here." Grace spoke carefully, choosing her words. "Officer, I haven't broken any laws. You need probable cause to search my belongings." Dale's laugh was harsh and ugly. "Probable cause? You're on my highway at midnight. That's all the cause I need. Now empty the bag, or I'll do it for you." Knowing resistance would only make things worse, Grace opened her bag and began removing items. Her wallet, her phone, a pack of tissues, a small worn Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a sealed envelope with her grandmother's name written on the front in careful script. Dale snatched up the envelope, ripped it open without ceremony, and pulled out $200 in cash, $20 bills, carefully folded. Well, what's this? Drug money?" "That's for my grandmother's medication," Grace said, her voice tight now. "She has diabetes. The prescription costs $180. Dale held the money up to the light as if inspecting it, then folded it and slipped it into his front pocket. "This is evidence now. I'll hold on to it." "That's theft, officer." Dale's face darkened. "Watch your mouth. That sounds like resisting arrest." Grace glanced past him at the patrol car. An elderly black couple sat in a sedan that had been pulled over, their faces pressed against the window, watching with terrified eyes but saying nothing. They'd learned, like so many others, that speaking up only made things worse. Tommy appeared beside Dale, holding a small plastic bag between two fingers. Grace's blood ran cold. She'd never seen that bag before in her life, and she knew with absolute certainty it hadn't been in her belongings. "Dale, look at this," Tommy said, his voice carrying a false surprise. "Found it in her stuff." Dale took the bag, examining it with exaggerated interest. Well. Narcotics possession. "Grace Adeyemi, you're under arrest." Grace's voice was steel. "That's not mine, and you know it." Dale's smile was cruel. "Tell it to the judge." "Oh, wait." He laughed, and Tommy joined in. "People like you don't get judges. You get public defenders who don't show up and plea deals that send you away for years." Little did he know, she was the judge. She was the person who would normally be sitting on the bench, weighing evidence, determining credibility, deciding fates. But at this moment, Grace understood something she'd never fully grasped before. The system only worked if the people operating it had integrity, and these men had none. Tommy pulled out handcuffs. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Grace complied, her mind racing. The metal cuffs bit into her wrists, tighter than necessary. She winced but made no sound. "Am I allowed to make a phone call?" Dale grabbed her upper arm roughly, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. "You'll do what I tell you to do. And right now, I'm telling you to shut up and walk." A white van pulled up. Unmarked, no police insignia, just a vehicle that could have belonged to anyone. The back doors opened, revealing two other people already inside. A young black man, maybe 20 years old, with tears streaming down his face, and a black woman in her 30s wearing a work uniform from a fast food restaurant. Grace was shoved toward the van. As she climbed in, the young man beside her whispered urgently, "Don't resist. It gets worse if you resist." Grace settled into the hard metal bench, her hands still cuffed behind her back. She looked at the faces around her. Young, frightened, defeated. How many others had sat here powerless? Dale climbed into the driver's seat, and Tommy took the passenger side. The van lurched forward, and Dale drove recklessly, slamming on the brakes at random intervals to throw them forward against their restraints. Tommy turned around in his seat, grinning. "You know what I love about midnight shifts? We get to clean up the trash." The young man beside Grace started to cry quietly. Grace leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "What's your name?" "Marcus. Marcus Johnson. I was just walking home from my shift at the warehouse. They said I matched the description of someone they were looking for." "What description?" "Black male, 20s. That was it. That was the whole description." The woman across from them spoke, her voice hollow. "I'm Shanice. They said I was jaywalking. I was waiting for the bus." Grace reached over, despite the handcuffs, and squeezed Marcus's hand gently. "It's going to be okay." She didn't know if she was lying. The Clarksville police station was a squat, ugly building that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The walls were stained, the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, and the air smelled of mold and desperation. Grace was pulled from the van and led into a processing room. The desk sergeant, Rita Holloway, a white woman in her 50s with hard eyes and a cigarette dangling from her lips, didn't even look up as Dale began filing his report. Possession with intent to distribute, resisting arrest, public disturbance. Every word was a lie. Grace spoke clearly, her voice carrying authority despite her circumstances. "I'd like to call my attorney." Rita finally looked up, her expression bored. "Phone's broken. Maybe tomorrow." "That's a violation of my constitutional rights." Rita shrugged. "Sue me." Grace made a mental note. Denial of right to counsel, falsified police report, unlawful detention. The list was growing. She was led down a hallway, the floor sticky beneath her shoes. As she walked, Dale accidentally stuck his foot out. Grace tripped, her hands still cuffed behind her back, and fell hard onto the concrete floor. Her knee hit first, and she felt the skin split open, warm blood seeping through her dress. The other inmates nearby gasped. Dale laughed. "Clumsy." Tommy looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Grace pushed herself up slowly, pain radiating through her knee. She didn't cry out. She didn't give them the satisfaction. The holding cell was a nightmare. One toilet with no seat, a sink that dripped brown water, 4 metal bunks with thin, stained mattresses. 5 women were crammed inside, and now there would be 6. As Dale shoved Grace through the door, an older black woman rushed forward, concern etched on her weathered face. "Baby, you all right?" Grace limped to a bunk and sat down carefully. The woman tore a strip from her own shirt and knelt down, wrapping Grace's bleeding knee with gentle hands. "I'm fine," Grace said quietly. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Dorothy. Dorothy Washington. They got me for an unpaid parking ticket. That was 3 days ago." Grace looked around the cell at the other faces. Shanice, the young woman from the van, sat in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest. A Hispanic woman in her 30s stared blankly at the wall. 2 other women, both black, lay on bunks, too exhausted or defeated to move. "What about the rest of you?" Grace asked. "Why are you here?" The Hispanic woman spoke without turning. "My name is Maria. They said I was acting suspicious. I was sitting in my car, waiting for my husband to finish his shift. They searched my car, didn't find anything, and arrested me anyway. One of the women on the bunks sat up slowly. She was young, maybe 25, with purple streaks in her hair. I'm Keisha. I talked back to a cop who pulled me over for a broken taillight. He said I was being aggressive. I wasn't. I was just tired. The last woman didn't speak at all. She just stared at the ceiling, her eyes empty. Grace felt rage building in her chest, cold and focused. This wasn't justice. This was a system designed to break people, to extract money from those who had the least, to punish poverty and skin color as if they were crimes. Through the bars, Grace could hear conversations, officers laughing, talking about their weekend plans, completely indifferent to the human suffering just feet away. She heard Rita on the phone. Yeah, we got 5 tonight. That's $12,500 in fines. Easy. Dale's voice drifted over. My daughter's tuition is paid for by idiots like these. Grace closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She was documenting everything, every word, every action, every violation. And when the time came, she would remember it all. Around 2 a.m., the station door opened and a new officer walked in. He was young, black, with a baby face and eyes that carried a weight of conflict. His name tag read Webb. Officer Marcus Webb brought cups of water to the cells, his movements careful, almost apologetic. When he reached Grace's cell, he paused, studying her face. You look familiar. Have we met? Grace shook her head. I don't think so. Marcus lingered, his brow furrowed. You're not from around here, are you? Just passing through. What did they get you for? Nothing. They planted drugs on me, stole my money, and assaulted me. Marcus's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. He said it quietly, like a confession. I'm sorry for what they do here. I've tried to speak up, but you want to keep your job, Grace said, not unkindly. I want to keep my family fed. Marcus glanced back at the other officers. But this isn't why I became a cop. This isn't what I signed up for. He walked away, but Grace saw him glance back twice, something working behind his eyes. At 3:00 a.m., the station doors burst open, and everyone straightened. Captain Richard Brennan strode in, a white man in his late 50s, crisp uniform, stern face. He was the night supervisor, known for running a tight ship. He did his routine inspection, walking past cells, checking paperwork. When he reached Grace's cell, he stopped. His eyes narrowed. Dale? Who's this? Dale swaggered over, confident. Just another arrest, Captain. Narcotics possession. Brennan stared at Grace for a long moment. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition? Uncertainty? What's your name? Grace Adeyemi. Brennan's face went pale. He pulled Dale aside and Grace strained to hear their hushed conversation. You sure about this one? Brennan's voice was tight. She's nobody. Just another. Did you run her ID properly? Of course I did. Something feels off, Dale. Across the room, Marcus Webb had pulled out his phone. His fingers flew across the screen, searching for something. Suddenly, his eyes went wide. He walked quickly to Brennan, pulling him further away, whispering urgently. Brennan's face drained of all color. He turned to look at Grace again, and this time, there was unmistakable horror in his eyes. He walked directly to the cell, his voice careful, controlled. Ma'am, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Grace met his eyes steadily. Of course, Captain. Brennan's jaw clenched. What do you do for a living? The cell went completely silent. Every inmate, every officer in earshot stopped moving. Grace paused, considering. She could end this now, but she needed to see how they would respond when they knew the truth. She needed this documented, witnessed, undeniable. "Why don't you tell me what you think I do?" she said calmly. Brennan's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Are you Judge Grace Adeyemi, Federal Circuit Court?" The silence that followed was absolute. Grace stood slowly, walked to the bars, and looked Captain Brennan directly in the eyes. "Yes, Captain. I am Federal Circuit Court Judge Grace Adeyemi, and for the past 5 hours, I have been illegally detained, falsely accused, assaulted, denied my right to counsel, and subjected to conditions that violate every constitutional protection we claim to uphold in this country." Brennan stumbled backward, as if physically struck. Behind him, Dale's face drained of all color. He grabbed the wall for support, his legs buckling. Tommy sat down hard on a bench, his hands shaking. Rita's cigarette fell from her lips. Marcus Webb closed his eyes and whispered, "Oh my God!" Brennan's voice shook. "Get her out of that cell, now!" Dale fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling so badly he dropped them twice. When the door finally opened, Grace stepped out with quiet dignity, still limping from her injured knee. She looked at each officer in turn. Her gaze was not angry, but penetrating, as if she was seeing through to their souls. Dorothy called out from the cell, "You go get 'em, baby! Make 'em pay!" Grace turned back and gave Dorothy a small nod. "I will, and I'll be back for all of you." Brennan tried to speak. "Your Honor, we had no idea." Grace cut him off, her voice sharp now. "You had no idea I was a judge? Would it have mattered if I wasn't? Do these women deserve this treatment?" She gestured to the cell. "That woman has been here 3 days for a parking ticket. That girl is 19 and was arrested for standing at a bus stop. When did we decide that poverty and skin color were crimes?" Brennan had no answer. Dale backed toward the door. Grace's voice stopped him cold. "Officer Hutchins, you're not dismissed. No one leaves this station." Dale's voice cracked. "This is a misunderstanding, Your Honor. We were just doing our jobs." Grace held up her wrist, showing the bruises from the handcuffs. Then she gestured to her torn, bloodied knee. "You planted evidence on me. You stole $200 from my belongings. You assaulted me. And you bragged about using illegal arrests to pay for your daughter's tuition." "I heard every word, Officer Hutchins." Tommy stepped forward, his voice desperate. "We didn't know. If we'd known who you were," Grace's voice cut like a blade. "That's the problem. You should treat everyone as if they might be someone who matters. Because we all do." She turned to Brennan. "Captain, I want the arrest records for this station for the past 6 months. I want the financial records showing how bail money and fines are processed. And I want the personnel files for every officer who's worked this checkpoint. Your Honor, I'll need authorization. I am the authorization. I'm also calling the FBI. This station is now under federal investigation." She turned to Marcus Webb. "Officer Webb, I need you to secure all documents and digital files in this building. No one accesses the computers. No one shreds anything. No one makes calls except the ones I authorize. Can you do that?" Marcus straightened, relief flooding his face. "Yes, Your Honor." "Absolutely." Grace used Brennan's office phone, dialing a number from memory. "This is Judge Grace Adeyemi, Federal Circuit Court. I'm at Clarksville Station, Mississippi. I need the FBI Civil Rights Division here immediately. Yes, I was detained under false charges and assaulted. No, I'm safe now. But there are other detainees who need immediate release and medical attention. I have evidence of systematic civil rights violations, corruption, and false imprisonment. Thank you. I'll be here. As she hung up, she made a second call. David, it's Grace. I need you to contact the ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and every civil rights attorney you know. Because we're about to tear down a system that's been breaking people for years. Over the next hour, the station transformed into a crime scene. Marcus Webb printed out arrest records. Grace reviewed them, her face hardening with each page. 127 arrests in 6 months. 119 were black individuals. 83% dismissed after fines were paid. Only 4% ever went to trial. Grace interviewed each woman in the holding cell, documenting their stories on video using Brennan's computer. She examined the evidence locker and found dozens of identical plastic bags like the one planted on her. Dale's fingerprints were all over them. Financial records revealed the ugly truth. $180,000 collected in fines and fees in 6 months, but only $40,000 made it to the county budget. The rest had vanished into officers' pockets. By 5 a.m., 3 black FBI vehicles pulled up outside the station. Grace met them at the door, now wearing a borrowed police jacket over her torn dress. Her bearing unmistakably authoritative, despite her disheveled appearance. Special Agent Morrison, thank you for coming. We have a lot to discuss. FBI agents flooded the station. Grace pointed at each officer in turn. Officer Dale Hutchins, false arrest, planting evidence, theft, assault on a federal official, civil rights violations under Section 242. Officer Tommy Weiss, complicity in the above. Sergeant Rita Holloway, falsifying police reports, extortion, denial of constitutional rights. One by one, they were read their rights and handcuffed. Dale's face turned red, tears streaming down his cheeks. My career, my family. Grace's voice was ice. You should have thought of that before you decided to become a criminal with a badge. Tommy broke down completely. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I knew it was wrong, but Dale, he said we'd get in trouble if we didn't go along. Grace looked at him with something that might have been pity. You're right. You did know it was wrong, and you did it anyway. That's what makes it unforgivable. By dawn, all 5 women in the holding cell were released. Grace personally drove Dorothy home in a police vehicle. Dorothy cried in the passenger seat. I prayed someone would hear us. I prayed God would send an angel. Grace squeezed her hand. I'm no angel, Dorothy. I'm just someone who was in the right place at the right time. But this isn't over. I'm going to make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else in this county. Over the next week, the story exploded across national news. 23 officers across Clarksville and surrounding counties were arrested or suspended. The county sheriff resigned amid the corruption investigation. The state attorney general announced a statewide review of rural checkpoint operations. Grace testified before a congressional committee on police misconduct, her words carrying the weight of personal experience. A federal consent decree was imposed on Clarksville PD, requiring oversight and reform for the next 5 years. Dale Hutchins was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, corruption, and assault on a federal official. His police pension was revoked. His daughter had to leave college. Tommy Weiss, who cooperated with investigators, received a reduced sentence of 3 years probation and was permanently barred from law enforcement. Rita Holloway pleaded guilty to extortion and served 18 months. Captain Brennan retired. He wasn't directly involved in the corruption, but he had failed to supervise properly, and that failure had allowed evil to flourish. Officer Marcus Webb was promoted to sergeant and became the community liaison for the reformed department. He would spend the next decade rebuilding trust between the police and the community they were meant to serve. Grace returned to the bench, but with a changed perspective. She established a program where judges and prosecutors spent 24 hours experiencing the criminal justice system from the defendant's perspective. Walking in their shoes, sitting in their cells, feeling their fear. Months later, Grace stood in her chambers, looking at the framed Constitution on her wall. She thought back to that night, the checkpoint, the cell, the faces of women who had been invisible to a system that was supposed to protect them. She picked up a photo from her desk. It showed her standing with Dorothy, Shanice, Maria, and Keisha at a community event, all of them smiling. They met once a month now, a support group for survivors of police misconduct. They called themselves the Midnight Six. Grace had thought she understood the justice system. She'd studied it, practiced it, presided over it for years. But until she sat in that cell, she didn't truly know what it felt like to be powerless, to be judged not by your character, but by your skin color. To realize that for millions of people, justice was just a word on a wall, not a reality they would ever experience. But that night taught her something else. One person, in the right moment, can change everything. Not because she was a judge, but because she refused to be silent. And that power belongs to all of us. This story teaches us three fundamental truths. First, never judge someone by their appearance or circumstances. You never know who they are or what they've endured. Second, power without accountability becomes tyranny, and silence in the face of injustice makes us complicit. And third, the justice system only works when those within it remember that it exists to serve everyone, not just those with privilege. Grace Adeyemi could have revealed her identity immediately and walked free, but she chose to endure, to witness, to document, because she knew her temporary suffering would expose a permanent evil and protect countless others from the same fate. Real change doesn't come from the top down. It comes from individuals who stand up, speak out, and refuse to accept that cruelty is just the way things are. Now I want to ask you something. If you had been in Grace's position, would you have revealed your identity immediately to end your own suffering? Or would you have stayed silent longer to expose the full extent of the corruption? What does justice require of us when we have the power to end our own pain, but not others? Have you ever witnessed injustice where you had to choose between your own safety and standing up for what's right? I truly want to know what you would have done. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've stayed with this story until the very end, you understand that truth and justice aren't just concepts. They're choices we make every single day. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for caring about stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us that one person, in one moment, can change everything. Next week, I'll share the story of a homeless veteran who taught a billionaire CEO the true meaning of honor, and it will change how you see success forever. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, you are someone who matters, your voice counts, and your actions ripple further than you'll ever know.